I had no idea about being a chef when I was growing up. Nobody spoke about being a chef. I didn't watch Julia Child on television. I didn't watch The Galloping Gourmet. No one in their right mind where I was from talked about being a chef. If you were to look in the want ads for a job as being a cook in my early days, it would have been right there with, if you wanted to be an exotic dancer, that's the same place in the newspaper ads that we were. If you were,
no, you were never in between those two options.
only in my dreams.
Oh, Nick. There he is, everyone.
Oh, my God.
If I could only chime in once.
Perfect.
You just did it. Take the mic away from him.
I was working in Key West, and I was really in a great spot at Louis' Backyard because we looked out over the ocean. I was in Key West, and so the little restaurants around town were making straight ahead either Cuban food, Bahamian food, Haitian food, Southern food. All of those things were happening. There were some that were doing French cuisine, and there were some that were sort of doing an amalgam of them both. I was at a place called the Pier House, and the owner, God bless him, had the sense to realize, thank you, that Key West had something special going on, and he would go to New York and get a chef to come down to Key West, but he would say, no, I want Bahamian conch chowder, I want key lime pie, I want black bean soup on the menu. And so he made me realize it was okay to have these things as part of a fancy restaurant, because it was at a hotel that charged a fair amount of money for that time. And I was working with chefs who were the first graduates, pretty much the first graduates out of the Culinary Institute of America. There were some chefs that were also old school European chefs that worked cruise lines, came up through the brigade system in Italy or in France. And so I had these various streams of influence that were going on around me, and I just loved it. I just was like, I finally realized there was some place that I could go in my life to find what I thought I could only find by either being a songwriter or a playwright or something to do with writing. I was a little too nervous to send in a manuscript and have it be rejected, and so I said, maybe I can do this thing with cooking, and I found that I could express myself in a way with food that I'd early thought only could happen through writing. And so the energy and the thought process that I saw in cooking kind of miraculously came about in the form of a letter of invitation one day, came to me from a division of Random House to the offices at Louis' Backyard. I can remember, Michael, to this moment of opening the letter, reading this invitation. Dear Chef Van Aken, we were recently at your restaurant, Louis' Backyard in Key West. We had dinner on a Friday. We were down there for vacation, no intention of doing any kind of like business whatsoever. We loved the food so much, we came back the following night. So I have two questions for you, she wrote. Have you collected your recipes over the years, and would you like to write a cookbook? I wrote back, yes, lying that I'd collected my recipes over the years. And yes, I'd like to write a cookbook, which wasn't a lie, because of course I would. I didn't think I was ever going to be approached by then. It was just not in my head. I remember almost floating up in the air, just going, shit, my life is changing. This is going to be something we're going to do. And I went home that night, Michael, and I had a desk pad at our rented house in Key West where Janet and I were living. Justin was a little baby still at the time, a little boy. And on that desk blotter, I wrote the introduction in rough form to the book, Feast of Sunlight. And then I wrote all these recipes, all these names of dishes that we had served at Louis' Backyard. I didn't even have a computer at that time. I got a typewriter and I sent it to them and said, here's my ideas. And a year later, A Feast of Sunlight came out. It was one of the very first cookbooks written by an American chef, the first cookbook written by a chef from Florida. And it wasn't long after that we were going on a book tour of America going to all the cities that I'd been reading about. And now they said, well, while you're in that town to do the television shows and radio shows and the interviews, at night you can go to a restaurant that you want to go to. And so we just studied hard about all the different restaurants that could be gotten to in Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, Boston, New York. And back then there was a budget for these things that doesn't exist pretty much anymore unless you're a major television star. And so Feast of Sunlight was something that I did in the office after I finished my shift, cooking the saute line position at Louis, and then we tested the dishes and turned into Feast of Sunlight. And that was, at that point in time, I was somewhere between the world of representing Florida, but also still holding on to the training wheels of the French and Italian things that were my teachers still at that point in time. It was not until a little bit after that I began to more clearly move away from the safety net of the European design and begin to think much more about Florida. So then when I wrote the subsequent books, increasingly I drilled down on trying to represent where we lived, first Key West, then Miami. And in doing that, I created a template, a paradigm for the recipes that we would teach the cooks in the restaurant on how to make the dishes that we would make. And so I was able to get double duty out of it. I was able to hone my abilities as a writer, but also begin to be much more clear as far as what I was about, what I wasn't about. And so then I just kept going. Every book was another place I wanted to learn from. New World Cuisine was really kind of a Charlie-like book, because by the time that book came out, Charlie was being published, because Charlie hadn't been published until after I did Feast, although we worked together before that. But by the time I did New World Kitchen, what I was doing there was I was seeking to educate myself about all of South America, because I'd learned a lot about Caribbean food by that time, by working in Key West and by writing Feast of Sunlight. But when I did New World Kitchen, I threw myself into a huge project that I thought would take maybe a year and a half, and it took 4 years.
Yeah,
to write
very
the book.
all-encompassing book.
There's 30-odd countries that are represented in that book. And when you write the book, you have to realize you can't do 12 dishes with venison. You got to mix it up. And so even though you might have found 9 good dishes with venison or snapper or whatever, you've got to make sure that at the end of the day, you've got a composition that's going to be, it's going to cover the bases.
Right.
So in the editorial process, if it were an album, I guess I would have had 30 songs, but I had to hone down to 10 or 12. And so, I leaned on everybody that I could learn from. Yeah. We interviewed everybody that worked at Norman's at the time. Where are you from? Where are your parents from? Where are your grandparents from? What do you cook at home? We began to invite, especially the mothers and the grandmothers, into our test kitchen, which was where we did our corporate events at night, to make dishes from their countries. And then we would tape and we would write down and we would cook with them. We would study these dishes that I had really no understanding of. I didn't know Brazilian food, Argentinian food from Uruguay. I had no idea how incredibly diverse and powerful the food of Peru was at that time, because I had never lived in any of these places. Of course I didn't. But by kind of restricting myself from falling on the things I had known already, we learned so much. And that's why one of the reasons you write a book. You don't write books often to make money, because they barely ever realize the advance. They don't. You do it out of that desire for your own self-education.